wanted to talk to you today about how we think about the foundations of our public education school system. Of course, there's many different ways that we think about it, right? Perhaps you're kind of imagining that little red schoolhouse on the grassy knoll. We certainly sometimes have this idyllic way of thinking about schools and schooling, but I think there's other important aspects to the foundations of our schools that I'd really like for us to consider, mainly because if we are interested and committed to this notion of schooling for a public and democratic citizenship, we really have to take into account how we have treated, right, citizens, residents of our country who have not been allowed to participate historically and to a large extent to the present day. So that's really what I want to focus on today. So if we think about the general chronology, because historians of education, we have to organize our ways of thinking into nice, neat little categories. Of course, real life isn't that way. But if we can just kind of generally think about the different periods in American educational history, these are some ways that we can think about it, right? So we have what we call the Colonial Period from the 1620s to 1820s. Certainly, there's different types of education systems going on if we think about indigenous groups, but we focus on 1620, right? Because it's the landing of the Mayflower. It's the way historians have also recorded that time period, and with particular emphasis in the northeast part of the United States. So if we think about that, I'll kind of go over some of the elements of that, but really largely from that 200-year time span, and of course 200 years is a long time. Many historians would say that it's really a focus on schooling and education as a private family affair. It's really not about the kind of what we think about open access and attaining achievement and success in some way. It's really about maintaining your status quo, kind of maintaining the privilege that you already have if you have that. There might be some ways that you gain private tutoring, if you will, but largely the colonial period is slow in thinking about the development of a school system. So if we're really thinking about the development of the kinds of school system that we're familiar with, we can really think about it in the context of the development of the common school period, right? So I categorize that. So if we think about the common school period in the North, starting from the 1830s, we have Horace Mann, who's considered like the father of the common school movement. But we also need to consider, right, how in the South, for example, because we have a system of slavery in the United States for over 250 years, right? Just think about that. 250 years. And think about it in the context of how old our country is. Okay, so if we think about it and we think about the common school period that begins to occur for African Americans in the South, 100 years later, I really want you to think about that 100-year gap in the formation of our public school system, right? Just think about that and think about if you were part of that population, 100 years gap, right? So we have these different ways of thinking about how do we think of the development of a public school that we say, well, certainly it started in the 1830s, but not always for everyone, all right? Also, if we think about in consideration of immigration, language diversity, population, ethnic diversity, that also occurs during the progressive era from the 1890s to the 1950s. We're really incorporating so much kind of vast diversity that's coming from different parts of the regions of the United States. Now, later on, I will focus in particular on Asian American groups, right? But at the same time, I'll be providing you with some of the historical examples that occurred during the Common School period and the Progressive era. But I'm just kind of giving you an overview of how we think about and categorize history of education in the United States. Also, along with that, right, and after World War II, we called it the Cold War period. From the 1950s to 1980s, we think about what it means to be in competition with Russia, right? And of course, that might have some currency as we think about it this day and age. But also in thinking about kind of the prevalence of science, mathematics, technology, we call it science, technology, engineering, and math these days, right? STEM fields. But we really think about the STEM fields emanating from the traditions within the Cold War period. But from the 1980s to the present, as we kind of think about the current emphasis on testing, accountability, right, and what we also call market-based reforms for vouchers, for charter school systems. I won't be going into these elements in depth today, but really to give you, again, that overview of how we think about public schooling in the United States.